Lakota chief tasted the poison meant for his son. A fleeing cook drew it out and was loved. The cup was already in my hand when Chayton looked up at me. That is all it was. A boy's eyes finding his father's across a fire. He was 8 years old and I had poured the drink myself, trading venison for a skin of the trader's whiskey. Not because I wanted it, but because it was a gesture of peace, and I was still learning which gestures cost nothing and which ones cost everything. I do not know what made me lift the cup first. Maybe it was nothing more than thirst and the wind and the smell of the smoke. Maybe it was something older than thought that moved my hand. The Lakota have a word for it, the thing that moves before the mind catches up. My grandfather used it when he described how he had turned his horse at the Battle of the Yellowstone. A breath before the arrow, the body knowing. I drank. The trader had been watching from across the fire. I remember that now. He had not blinked. The taste was off by half a breath, bitter under the wood smoke sweetness, something metallic that sat at the back of the throat like a copper coin left in a pocket too long. I set the cup down. I did not say anything. Chayton was looking at his hands, picking at a frayed edge of his moccasin, the way boys do when they are bored and the night is quiet. I told him to go to his mother's fire. He went without argument, which was rare, and I remember thinking even then that the world had its mercies placed in strange order. By the time the trader had packed his mule and gone south, I had begun to sweat. I will tell this the way I lived it, which is not cleanly. There are pieces I remember the way you remember a dream, vivid in the wrong places, blurred where you would expect sharpness. I know how the snow looked on the third morning, but I cannot tell you what my wife's face looked like in the first hour. I know the sound of the woman's feet on the frozen ground before I ever saw her clearly. These are the things that stay. My name is Taco D'Amato. My band wintered in the valley of the Cheyenne River, 43 people, 11 lodges, 2 old men who had fought in the wars my father's father spoke of, and now did nothing but argue about it. I had led them for 9 years. Before me it was my uncle, and before him, a man I do not remember except that he wore a bear-claw necklace and smelled of pine resin. The trader's name was Renner. He had a furred hat and a missing thumb on his left hand, and I had traded with him 3 times before this and found him honest enough. Later, I learned the whiskey had been prepared by a man in Deadwood who bore a grudge I had nothing to do with, a business about horses and a burned supply depot, a debt that had been transferred to me by mistake or by convenience. It does not matter. The poison was in the cup and I drank it. That is the beginning. My second wife, Winona, was not a healer. She was a good woman and I loved her, but her remedies were the ordinary ones: rest, broth, poultices of sage. She sat with me through the first night and did what she could, and what she could do was not enough. By morning I could not hold water. My hands had begun to shake. The cold had taken on a different quality, a deep cold that did not come from the air. One of the old men, Hehaka, the one who argued loudest about the wars, came and looked at my face and went back out without speaking, which told me more than the shaking did. The woman arrived at mid-morning. She came from the east, following the river on foot, which was unusual enough that the boys who scouted the eastern approach came back to report it before she was within 100 yards of camp. A white woman, they said, traveling alone, carrying a pack too large for her frame. No horse, no weapon they could see. Moving fast for someone who had been walking all night. I was lying in my lodge when they brought her to the entrance. I heard her voice before I saw her, not frightened, which surprised me. Steady. She spoke enough Lakota to say she was not a threat, that she had seen the smoke from the valley ridge, that she was looking for no trouble. What she said next, one of my men told me afterward, was that she could smell sickness from 20 yards and she had roots in her pack that might help. I told them to let her in. She was not young. 35, maybe near 40, with dark hair cut practical and short, hands that were rough and looked capable. She had a bruise along her jaw that was 4 or 5 days old, gone yellow at the edges, and she moved the way people move when they have been walking scared for a long time, quick and quiet, and with her eyes on all the angles of a room. She took one look at me and then crouched down and said, in English now, that I needed to drink more water than I thought possible, and she needed my wife to boil certain things. She did not ask if I agreed. I respected that. Her name was Clara Marsh. That is what she told me on the second day when I was able to hold conversation. She had been a cook at a mining camp near Rapid City. Not a fancy place, she said, a dirty place, one of the camps that sprung up and were gone before anyone made a map of them. She had worked there 8 months, long enough to know the men she worked for were not men she wanted to keep working for. She did not elaborate on that immediately. I did not push. The bruise on her jaw said enough about the company she had kept. What she had and what she used on me through those first 2 days was a knowledge of plants that she had learned from a Cheyenne woman who had wintered near her mother's farm when Clara was a girl. Meadow saffron for the shaking, activated charcoal from the fire, worked into a paste, a root she called by its Lakota name, which I recognized, boiled 3 times and reduced to a dark bitter tea that she made me drink in small amounts every 2 hours through the night. I will not pretend it was comfortable. It was not. There were hours when my body was trying to expel everything it had ever contained, and she sat beside me through those hours without ceremony and without distaste. She had a cloth soaked in cold river water that she kept against the back of my neck. She talked sometimes, low and even not to me exactly, more to the air around me, the way a person talks when they need to fill silence so it doesn't fill with worse things. Old things. Recipes. What she would plan if she ever had a piece of ground. Winona sat on the other side and watched her, and I know my wife well enough to say that what moved across her face during those hours was not simple jealousy. It was the more complicated thing, the kind of watching a person does when they understand that someone else can do something they cannot. On the 3rd morning, I sat up on my own. It sounds small. It was not small. The previous evening I had not been certain I would. Clara was asleep near the entrance, her back against one of the lodge poles, her pack pulled close to her side. Even in sleep, she had the look of a woman ready to move. The bruise on her jaw had gone dark again in the cold morning light. I watched her for a moment and thought about the fact that she had walked through a valley she didn't know, toward a fire she couldn't identify, carrying roots in a pack, on the chance that someone there needed them. I ate a little that morning. Plain broth kept it down. When Clara woke, she looked at me and something went out of her face, a tension she had been holding since she arrived, a coiled watchfulness in the muscles around her eyes. She did not say anything. She reached into her pack and checked the remaining supply of the root, counted what was left, and told me I needed 2 more days of the tea. I told her she was welcome to stay 2 more days. She looked at me the way people look when they're calculating whether a kindness is a trap. Then she nodded. She stayed 4 days. On the 3rd day I was on my feet. We walked along the river slowly, because my legs still had a quality I did not trust, and she walked beside me with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the tree line. I asked her where she had been going when she found us. West, she said. She had a sister in the Montana Territory, or had had one. It had been 4 years since a letter, but she thought the sister was still there, near a town called Miles City. She was going to find out. I asked if she had been running from the mining camp when she arrived. She said yes. I asked how far behind her the trouble was. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she didn't know. Maybe not behind her at all anymore. Maybe the man she had worked for had more important things to tend to. She said it plainly, without hope attached to it, the way you describe weather. I asked what she had done to earn being chased. She looked at me sidelong. Then she said she had broken the man's nose with a cast-iron skillet and taken 2 horses, one of which she had ridden to exhaustion and left at a water hole 12 miles east. I said nothing for a moment. Then I told her that seemed like a proportionate response. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh, and it was low and sudden and genuine, and it changed the whole shape of her face. On the fourth day, she announced she was leaving in the morning. She said it the way people announce things they have decided and do not want to revisit. She was checking the lashing on her pack, adding supplies that my people had given her: dried meat, a good blanket, a spare pair of moccasins that Winona had made and pressed into her hands without explanation. I sat outside the lodge and watched her work, and I thought about several things. I thought about Chayton, who had taken to following her around camp with the specific attachment boys form to adults who treat them like small adults. She spoke to him directly, answered his questions without abbreviating them, showed him the names of the plants she carried. He was going to miss her in the silent way children miss things, without announcement. I thought about the trader Renner, who was still somewhere south of us, and what I intended to do about him when spring made travel easy. I thought about Clara Marsh, who had walked into my camp with a pack full of roots and pulled me back from the far edge of something, and who was now leaving with a blanket and dried meat and a plan to walk to Montana. I called her name. She looked up from the pack. I told her the road to Miles City went through country that was not friendly to a woman alone at that time of year, and that I had 2 men who were riding north in 6 days to meet a band wintering near the Powder River, and that the route took them through terrain that would put her within a half-day of the trail to Miles City. I said she was welcome to ride with them if she wanted. She looked at me for a long moment, then she said she supposed that made sense. I told her she could stay those 6 days in camp. There was work if she wanted it, we had enough to do, and she had made it clear enough that she was not a woman who did well with idleness. She could cook for the camp if she liked, or not as she chose. She asked if she would be in anyone's way. I told her she had been in no one's way since she arrived. She put down the pack. 6 days stretched to 10, and then to 14. The cold broke a little the second week, and there was light on the snow that made the valley look like something hammered out of softer metal than iron. Clara had taken over the morning fire, not by announcement but by simply rising earlier than anyone else and having it going before the camp woke, and the camp had adapted around her the way camps adapt, quietly, without ceremony, incorporating a new fact of life. She and Winona had reached some arrangement I was not party to. I noticed it in the quality of the silences between them, no longer the careful kind, but the easy kind, the silence of 2 people who have said what needed saying and found it sufficient. Chayton had appointed himself her assistant, which she accepted with what I recognized now as characteristic lack of fuss. I watched all of this from a certain distance, the way a man watches things he does not entirely know what to do with. On the 14th day, I was at the river breaking ice for water when she came down the bank with 2 empty bladders and crouched beside me to fill them. We worked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that had its own texture by then. The water was very cold and very clear. She said without looking up, "I know the arrangement was 6 days." I said the arrangement had been extended by poor weather. She said the weather had been better for a week. I told her she was right about that. She sat back on her heels and looked at the river. Her hands were red from the cold. She said, "I don't know what's in Miles City anymore. 4 years is a long time for a letter not to come." I didn't say anything. She said, "I've been useful here." I said she had. She looked at me then full on. Clara Marsh did not look away from things. It was one of the first things I had noticed about her, the directness of it, not aggressive, just honest, a person who had decided some time ago that she didn't have the energy for pretending to look at other places. She said, "I'm not asking to be kept. I know what I can do and what I can offer. I'm asking if there's a place here for a woman who works hard and doesn't cause trouble and wants to stay." I held her gaze. I told her there was. She nodded once, the same way she had nodded when I said she could stay 2 more days, calculating, then accepting. But there was something different in it now, a loosening. She said, "Then I'll stay." I handed her the second bladder and she filled it without saying anything more. And when we walked back up the bank to camp, the morning light was on the snow, and the lodges were sending up their first thin lines of smoke. And I thought about the night I had lifted a cup to my lips for no particular reason, and the way my hand had moved before my mind could argue with it. The Lakota word for it. The body knowing. I will not give you a long accounting of what came after. Life is not a story with an ending in the right place, and I have never been a man who thought the telling of a thing was the same as the understanding of it. What I will tell you is this. She learned the language, not perfectly, and she would laugh at herself when she got it wrong, which was often, and Chayton corrected her with the merciless precision of an 8-year-old who has found a new occupation. She learned the plants of the valley floor, added them to the ones she already knew, and by the following summer there were people from 2 neighboring bands who came to her when their own healers were uncertain. I will tell you that Winona came to me one evening, some months later, and said what she said plainly, because she was that kind of woman. She said she was not angry. She said she had watched Clara sit with me through the poison nights, and she had understood something in those hours that she had been working out ever since. She said she did not have a word for what she wanted me to understand, but that she thought the 3 of us could live without burning the camp down, if I was careful and honest. I told her I would try to be both. I told you already that I have not always known which gestures cost nothing and which cost everything. I paid for that in the months that followed, in the careful daily work of it, in the conversations that happened at the edge of things, in the slow, patient rebuilding of trust that I had not exactly broken but had shifted, the way a foundation shifts in a hard frost. It was not simple. I will not tell you it was simple. But I will tell you this. There was a morning in late spring, 2nd year of Clara being with us, when I woke before dawn and went out and stood at the edge of the river. The valley was still dark, just the first gray at the rim of the hills. I could hear the camp behind me, the small sounds of people sleeping, a horse moving in the rope corral. And then her footstep on the bank. That specific sound, I knew it by then the way you know a voice, individual as a name. She came and stood beside me, pulled her blanket around her shoulders. We didn't speak for a while. Then she said, quietly, the way she said most things, "You're going to see about Renner this week." It was not a question. She had heard something in how I had spoken the evening before, some decision in it. I said yes. She looked at the river. Then she looked at me. Her hand found my arm in the half-dark, just laid itself there, warm and steady through the blanket, and she said, "Come back." Not a plea, not a performance, just the word said straight. I covered her hand with mine. The valley went on in the dark before us, the river running low and cold, the hills holding their color back until the light was ready for them. My camp behind me, my son sleeping in his mother's lodge. This woman beside me with her hand on my arm and her eyes on the water, asking me plainly for the one thing she needed. I told her I intended to. The light came up slow, the way light does in that country, not sudden, not dramatic, just the world deciding to let you see it again. She did not move her hand. I stood there and felt the weight of it, good and real, and thought that a man could travel a long way and drink worse poison than I had and never land in a place this solid. I was not a young man. I had been leading people since I was 31, and I knew the math of it, what a chief's life cost in the places you didn't get to keep. But I had this. The river, the light, her hand. A woman who had walked out of the dark toward a fire she didn't know because she had something in her pack that might help, who had stayed because she wanted to, not because she had nowhere else to go, who asked me for nothing except that I come back. I stood there until the hills turned gold. Then I went back to camp to get ready to ride.